Lady, unless you are here to pay his rent, this man is finished." The words cracked through Miller's diner like a plate dropped on tile, and every fork in the room seemed to stop halfway to someone's mouth. Caleb Rowan stood beside Booth 7 with his work jacket still damp from the rain, one hand resting on his daughter Maddie's shoulder, the other holding a folded notice he had been trying to keep hidden. Across from him, Victor Harlan, the landlord with polished shoes and a voice too loud for a small-town diner, tapped the paper with 2 fingers and smiled like Mercy had never once visited him. 3 weeks late, Caleb. 3. I gave you chances. I gave you patience. Now I want the house empty by Monday. Maddie looked up from her little sketchbook, her blue crayon frozen above a drawing of a yellow house, with smoke curling from the chimney. Daddy, she whispered, are we moving again? Caleb swallowed. He did not answer quickly, because some answers can break a child if they come too fast. He only squeezed her shoulder and said, we are going to be okay, sweetheart. Victor laughed under his breath. That is what men say when they have nothing left. The rain pressed against the diner windows in silver lines. The old neon sign outside flickered red across Caleb's face, showing the tired lines near his eyes, the gray at his temples, the quiet dignity of a man who had learned to lose without becoming cruel. He had patched roofs in February wind, repaired porches for people who never paid on time, and sold his late wife's wedding china to cover hospital bills that still arrived like ghosts. But he had never let Maddie hear him beg. Not once. I can bring you $400 Friday, Caleb said softly. I have 2 jobs lined up. One in Rutland, one 12 miles north. Friday is not Monday, Victor snapped. And hope is not rent. A few people looked away. One waitress wiped the same clean counter twice. No one wanted to witness a good man being made small. Then headlights swept across the diner windows. One black sedan rolled in, then another, then a third, their tires whispering through puddles. The bell above the door rang once. Cold rain and expensive perfume entered together. A woman stepped inside wearing a charcoal coat, her auburn hair pinned neatly, her face calm in the way only powerful people can afford to be calm. Behind her came a tall man with a leather briefcase and a look that judged the room before his shoes had dried. The woman did not scan the diner for the richest man. She did not ask for a table. She walked straight toward Caleb Rowan, carrying a small wooden box against her chest, as if it held something more fragile than money. Victor turned, annoyed. Can I help you? She ignored him. Caleb looked at her, confused, guarded, polite even in humiliation. Ma'am. The woman stopped 3 feet from him. Her eyes dropped to Maddie, then to the eviction notice, then back to Caleb's face. Something in her expression softened, but only for a second. Are you Caleb Rowan? Yes. The Caleb Rowan who stopped at an old Sunoco station on Route 9 7 years ago during a thunderstorm? Caleb went still. The diner seemed to lean closer. Even Victor's smile faded. Caleb's voice lowered. How do you know about that? The woman opened the wooden box. Inside lay a faded motel receipt, a torn paper coffee cup sleeve, and an old brown work jacket Caleb had not seen in years. Maddie stood slowly, her crayon slipping from her fingers. The woman's voice trembled just enough for the whole room to hear the truth before she said it. My name is Evelyn Whitaker. My father was Arthur Whitaker. Victor's face changed at the name, because everyone in Vermont knew the Whitaker fortune, the glass towers, the hotels, the company that owned half the buildings men like Victor dreamed of entering. Caleb said nothing. Evelyn held the old jacket toward him with both hands, like an offering. Mr. Rowan, she said, I came to pay my father's debt. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and second chances, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Caleb Rowan, the single father who once gave away his last warm coat to a stranger in the rain, never knowing that one quiet act of grace would one day walk back through the door and silence everyone who had laughed at him. Caleb did not take the jacket at first. He only stared at it, as if a piece of his old life had been pulled from a grave and placed under diner lights. The brown canvas was faded at the sleeves, the left pocket still marked by a small tear from the year he had worked roofing jobs through an early frost. Maddie looked from the jacket to her father, then to Evelyn, trying to understand why a woman who arrived in black cars was speaking to her daddy like he mattered. Victor Harlan cleared his throat. Arthur Whitaker, he said, suddenly careful. As in Whitaker Holdings? Evelyn did not look at him. Yes. Well, Victor said, forcing a laugh that sounded smaller than before. I am sure whatever business you have with Caleb can wait until he settles his obligations. Caleb lowered his eyes to Maddie's sketchbook, to the yellow house she had drawn with the red door and crooked chimney. That was how she always drew home, brighter than it was, warmer than it felt, safer than he could afford to make it. He reached down and picked up the blue crayon from the floor. Here you go, sweetheart, he said quietly. Maddie took it with both hands. Daddy, why does she have your coat? Because I gave it away once, Caleb answered. Before you were old enough to remember. Evelyn watched him carefully. Most men she met filled silence with explanations. Caleb did not. He stood in it with a steadiness that made the room uncomfortable. He was not tall in the way boardrooms respected. He did not wear a suit or speak with the polished ease of lawyers. His boots were worn white at the edges from salt and mud. His hands were scratched from lumber, shingles, and old pipes that bit back when winter made metal stubborn. Yet there was something about him that did not bend. Not under shame. Not under money. Not even under the eyes of a diner full of people waiting to see whether he would break. For 7 years, Caleb Rowan had been the man people called when something leaked, sagged, cracked, froze, or fell apart. He fixed back steps for retired teachers. He patched church gutters after storms. He repaired broken cabinets for widows and accepted pies when they could not afford cash. People said he was kind, but they said it the way people sometimes describe a poor man when they do not know how else to explain why he has not become bitter. They forgot that kindness can cost more than pride. After Nora died, the town watched Caleb sell his truck, then buy an older one. They watched him leave the pharmacy with paper bags and tired eyes. They watched him bring Maddie to school with her hair braided unevenly but clean, her lunch packed, her coat buttoned to the chin. Some pitied him. Some judged him. A few helped. Most looked away because grief makes people nervous when there is no easy check to write. Mr. Rowan, Evelyn said, softer now. My father left instructions. Caleb finally lifted his gaze. Your father should not have. Grant Ellison, the man with the briefcase, stepped forward. Mr. Rowan, this is a legal matter involving a private estate directive. Miss Whitaker is here to resolve it efficiently. Caleb looked at him once, not angry, not impressed. People are not resolved, sir. The sentence landed gently, but it landed. Grant blinked. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the wooden box. Victor shifted his weight, no longer certain which version of Caleb he was looking at. The old ceiling fan hummed above them. Rain whispered against the glass. Somewhere near the kitchen, a coffee pot gave a tired hiss. Caleb folded the eviction notice once, then again, and placed it in his jacket pocket like it was not the heaviest paper in the room. Miss Whitaker, he said, I do not know what your father told you. I do not know what you came here carrying. But my daughter has had enough strangers watch her father be embarrassed tonight. Evelyn lowered the jacket slightly. For the first time since entering the diner, she looked less like a chief executive officer and more like a daughter standing at the edge of a promise she did not yet understand. Then let me say this plainly, she replied. My father believed you saved his life. Caleb's face did not change, but his breath caught. Maddie heard it. Evelyn heard it. And in that small, sacred pause, the diner understood that whatever had begun 7 years ago on a rain-soaked highway had not come back as charity. It had come back as truth. Evelyn placed the wooden box on the edge of booth 7, careful not to disturb Maddie's sketchbook. The box was dark walnut, polished by age, with brass hinges worn dull at the corners. It did not look like something from a corporate office. It looked like something a man kept beside his bed when the world had already taken too much, and he was afraid memory might be next. Grant Ellison opened his briefcase with a sharp click. Miss Whitaker, with respect, I recommend we handle the contents in a private setting. Evelyn did not turn around. No, Grant stiffened. This diner is not appropriate. Neither was the way my father was treated that night, she said. That silenced him. Caleb felt Maddie's small fingers find his hand under the table. He held them gently, hoping she could feel calm even though his own heart had begun to beat against his ribs like rain on tin. Evelyn lifted the first item from the box. It was the motel receipt, yellowed at the edges, dated October 17th, 7 years earlier, from a roadside inn 12 miles outside Brattleboro. The name on it was not Arthur Whitaker. It was written as A. Walker. Caleb remembered that name. He remembered the clerk behind the glass. He remembered counting damp bills from his wallet while Nora waited in the truck, wrapped in a hospital blanket, too weak to protest, but still smiling at him like he had done something holy instead of foolish. He used a false name, Evelyn said. He often did when he wanted to disappear. Victor Harlan muttered, "Billionaires pretending to be poor. Must be nice." Caleb looked at him then, and the quiet in his eyes made Victor look down first. Evelyn removed the coffee sleeve next. On the back, in faded black ink, were 3 words written in an old man's hand. The man stopped. Maddie leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Evelyn's voice softened. "It means my father believed hundreds of people passed him that night, but your father was the only one who pulled over." Caleb shook his head slightly. "That is not something worth building a story around." To him, it was. Evelyn reached into the box again and unfolded a small sheet of stationery embossed with the Whitaker family crest. She held it with both hands, but even then, it trembled. This was found inside his private will, separate from the estate documents, sealed in an envelope with your name on it. Grant stepped forward quickly. "Miss Whitaker, I must object to reading that aloud." Evelyn finally faced him. "You object to many things, Grant. Tonight, you will have to survive the truth." A quiet breath passed through the diner. Not laughter, not applause, just the sound of people realizing power had changed sides. Evelyn looked back to the paper. "It says, everything I built after that night belongs, in part, to the man who stopped. Not because he knew me. Not because cameras were watching. Not because reward was possible. He stopped because I was cold, and he was still human enough to care." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked toward the window, where rain blurred the reflections of the black sedans into long, dark rivers. He did not want the room to see what those words had done to him. He had spent years being useful, invisible, and tired. Praise felt heavier than insult because insult was familiar. Evelyn continued, her voice lower now. "My father wrote that before he died, he wanted 3 things returned to you. Your coat, the money you spent that night, and the dignity the world failed to give you." Caleb turned back slowly. "Miss Whitaker, I gave him a coat and a room. That is all." "No," Evelyn said, closing the letter with care. "That is what you gave, but it is not all he received." Maddie looked up at her father, seeing him differently for the first time, not as the man who worried over bills and fixed broken steps, but as the man whose kindness had traveled 7 years through rain, wealth, death, and silence to find its way back. And Caleb, who had faced eviction without raising his voice, suddenly had no words at all. 7 years earlier, the rain had come down so hard that Route 9 looked less like a highway and more like a black river with yellow lines drowning beneath it. Caleb Rowan was 32 then, thinner in the face, younger in the eyes, but already carrying the tired patience of a man who had learned that life did not always wait for you to be ready. Nora sat beside him in the passenger seat of their old blue pickup, wrapped in a gray hospital blanket, her head resting against the window as the wipers fought the storm one tired sweep at a time. In the back seat, little Maddie slept in her car seat, cheeks pink, one hand curled around a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. They had just left the oncology clinic in Lebanon, 2 hours from home. The doctor had spoken gently. That had frightened Caleb more than if the man had shouted. Gentle voices often came before hard news. Nora reached across the seat and touched his wrist. "Stop gripping the wheel like it owes you money," she whispered. Caleb gave a small smile because she needed one from him. "The wheel and I have an agreement. Does it know you are stubborn? It learned from you." She laughed softly, then coughed into her sleeve. Caleb looked at her too quickly, and she shook her head. "Eyes on the road, Mr. Rowan." That was Nora. Even with sickness stealing pieces of her strength, she still protected his courage like it was something fragile. They were 8 miles past Bennington when Caleb saw the old Sunoco station glowing through the rain. He was nearly out of gas, and the card in his wallet had just enough left to get them home if the pump was merciful. He pulled in under the buzzing lights, stepped out, and felt cold rain slide down the back of his collar. That was when he saw the man near the ice machine. He was older, soaked through, one hand pressed against the wall, his gray hair plastered to his forehead. His coat was too thin for October in Vermont, and his shoes looked ruined. 2 customers walked around him as if kindness might stain their boots. The clerk leaned out the door and called, "You cannot stay here." I already told you. The old man did not argue. He just nodded, embarrassed by his own need. Caleb stood by the pump with the nozzle in his hand and $20 of gas he could barely afford. Nora watched through the windshield. Their eyes met. She knew before he moved. Caleb walked over. Sir, are you hurt? The man blinked at him, wary and exhausted. No, just cold. Do you have somewhere to go? Not tonight. The clerk sighed loudly. Buddy, do not get involved. He has been hanging around for half an hour. Caleb looked at the clerk, then at the man. Half an hour is a long time to be cold. He took off his brown work jacket and placed it around the old man's shoulders. The man tried to refuse, but Caleb held it there with quiet firmness. Keep it. I have a heater in the truck. He bought 1 coffee, 1 egg sandwich, and 1 small carton of milk for Maddie with money that should have gone into the gas tank. Then he helped the stranger into the pickup, where Nora shifted carefully to make room and smiled, as if welcoming him into a church pew. The man looked at her blanket, at the sleeping child, at Caleb's wet shirt, and shame filled his eyes. You have your own troubles, he said. Nora answered before Caleb could. Trouble is not an excuse to stop being decent. Caleb drove him 12 miles to a roadside motel with a flickering vacancy sign. At the front desk, he paid cash under the name the stranger gave him, a Walker. When the old man asked why, Caleb only looked back at the truck, where Nora was holding Maddie's little hand while rain softened the world outside. Because one day my daughter may meet a stranger, he said. And I hope somebody remembers she is human before they ask what she is worth. The old man stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at the coffee in his hands as if Caleb had given him something far greater than warmth. What is your name? He asked. Caleb Rowan. I will remember that. Caleb nodded, not believing life would ever circle back to such a small moment. Then he returned to his truck, to his sick wife, to his sleeping daughter, and to a road still dark with rain, never knowing that the man in room 12 was Arthur Whitaker, and that by morning, the future of an empire had already begun to change. Back in Miller's diner, the past seemed to drain from Caleb's face as slowly as rainwater sliding down the window glass. He looked at the jacket in Evelyn's hands, and for a moment he was not standing beside Booth 7 anymore. He was back on Route 9, wet to the bone, counting dollars under fluorescent lights while Nora smiled at him from the truck like a woman who already knew the cost of goodness and chose it anyway. Maddie touched his sleeve. Daddy. Caleb blinked, returned to the present, and gave her the softest smile he could manage. I am here, sweetheart. Evelyn closed the wooden box and nodded once to Grant Ellison. The lawyer removed a cream-colored envelope from his briefcase, thick, formal, and sealed with the Whitaker crest. He held it out the way men like him handed down verdicts, not gifts. Mr. Rowan, Grant said, under the instructions of the late Arthur Whitaker, a private trust has been established in your name. Caleb did not reach for it. A trust? $18 million, Grant said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. A glass slipped from someone's hand behind the counter and knocked against the sink. Victor Harlan's mouth opened, then closed. Maddie stared at the envelope as if it were a thing from a fairy tale, too impossible to belong in a room that smelled of coffee, raincoats, and fried onions. Caleb only looked tired. Evelyn studied him, waiting for joy, shock, relief, anything a person might show when the walls around his life suddenly stopped closing in. But Caleb's eyes lowered to the eviction notice in his pocket, then to Maddie's small drawing of the yellow house, then to the jacket he had once given away without expecting even a thank you. That is too much, he said. Grant laughed once, dry and sharp. Mr. Rowan, I do not think you understand. This is not a negotiation. I understand fine. Caleb's voice stayed quiet. Your father was cold. I helped him get warm. Grant's smile tightened, and in return, he created a legally binding estate instrument. Refusing it would be irrational. Caleb looked at him. So was giving a stranger my coat in a storm. The diner went still again, but this time the silence was different. It was not pity. It was respect beginning to stand up inside people who had been sitting with their judgment for too long. Evelyn stepped closer, her expression no longer polished. My father wanted you to have security. A home. A future for your daughter. Caleb swallowed at that, because Maddie's future was the one place where his pride had no easy shelter. He looked down at her, and she looked back with wide, trusting eyes. Would Mommy say yes? She whispered. The question touched him where no amount of money could. Caleb crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. Your mom would say we should be grateful, he said. But she would also say we should know the difference between a gift and a price. Grant exhaled impatiently. There is no price, only standard confidentiality, image consent, and a public statement prepared by the estate. Caleb stood slowly. There it is. Evelyn turned sharply toward Grant. What public statement? Grant adjusted his cuff. A simple narrative. Struggling local father receives generosity from Whitaker family. It protects the brand and honors your father's philanthropic legacy. Caleb gave a sad little nod, as if he had expected money to arrive carrying chains. Your father did not owe me a press release. Evelyn's face paled. Grant, you told me this was only about fulfilling the will. It is, Grant said. Efficiently. Caleb pushed the envelope gently back toward him. If your father wanted to pay me, he misunderstood me. Evelyn stared at the envelope, then at Caleb, and something inside her carefully built world cracked. This man was 3 weeks behind on rent. His truck barely started. His child was asking whether they still had a home. Yet he was standing in front of $18 million and refusing to let his dignity be purchased by the pound. Victor Harlan shifted near the booth, suddenly aware that every cruel word he had spoken was still hanging in the air. Caleb picked up Maddie's sketchbook and handed it to her. Miss Whitaker, he said, I am sorry your father carried that weight. But kindness is not a debt. It is supposed to keep moving. Evelyn's eyes filled, though she did not let the tears fall. For the first time in her life, she understood that her father had not sent her to deliver money. He had sent her to meet the kind of man money could not measure. Grant Ellison's expression hardened, but not loudly. Men like him rarely needed volume. They used paper, signatures, and polished sentences to make ordinary people feel trapped. He slid the envelope back into his briefcase, then removed a second document, longer, clipped neatly, with colored tabs along the side. Mr. Rowan, he said, sentiment is admirable, but let us be practical. You are facing eviction. Your daughter is watching. Your financial position is, by any fair description, fragile. Refusing structured assistance because of pride would be irresponsible. Caleb's face remained calm, but Maddie felt his hand tighten around hers. Evelyn heard it too, that careful cruelty hidden inside professional concern. Grant, she said, enough. No, Miss Whitaker, Grant replied, still looking at Caleb. This is exactly why people like him need guidance. Miracles do not manage themselves. The diner air changed. The old men near the coffee counter stopped pretending not to listen. The waitress behind the register lowered her eyes. Victor Harlan stood beside the booth, suddenly quiet, as if even he recognized when greed had dressed itself in manners. Caleb looked at the document. What is that? Grant smiled without warmth. A standard cooperation agreement. You accept the trust. You appear at tomorrow's press conference. You thank the Whitaker family publicly. You agree not to contradict the approved statement. In return, your housing issue disappears, your daughter's education is secured, and your life becomes considerably easier. Caleb nodded once, slowly. And if I do not? Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound private and just loud enough for everyone to hear. Then you remain a struggling handyman with an overdue rent notice and a truck that barely made it into this parking lot. Men like you do not get miracles, Mr. Rowan. They get managed. Maddie's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Caleb had taught her that tears were not weakness, but he had also taught her that some moments deserved stillness. She stood beside him with her little sketchbook pressed to her chest, the yellow house bent slightly under her fingers. Caleb glanced down at her, and whatever pain Grant's words had caused him disappeared behind a father's duty to remain gentle. Sweetheart, he said softly, do you remember what your mom used to say about people who talk down to others? Maddie swallowed. They are usually standing on something that is already breaking. A breath moved through the diner. Evelyn turned toward the girl, surprised by the wisdom in such a small voice. Caleb looked back at Grant. My daughter understands more about dignity than that paper does. Grant's jaw tightened. Dignity will not pay your rent. No, Caleb said. But losing it costs more than rent. The words did not strike like thunder. They settled like snow, quiet and impossible to ignore. Evelyn looked at the cooperation agreement in Grant's hand and suddenly saw every boardroom she had ever sat in. Every charity dinner where compassion was photographed before it was practiced. Every executive who spoke of families while cutting corners that hurt them. For years, she had trusted Grant because he was efficient. Now she saw what efficiency looked like when it had no soul. "Give me the agreement," she said. Grant hesitated. "Miss Whitaker, I strongly advise against reacting emotionally. Give it to me." This time, her voice carried the weight of every Whitaker tower, every signature, every employee who knew her name before they knew her heart. Grant handed it over. Evelyn read the first page, then the second, her face growing colder with every line. "You added image consent for Maddie?" Caleb's eyes sharpened. Grant lifted his chin. "The child is part of the story." Caleb stepped slightly in front of his daughter. Not dramatically, not aggressively. Simply enough to make clear that no camera, no company, and no fortune would reach her without passing through him first. "My daughter is not a story," he said. "She is a child." Evelyn closed the document. Then, with slow, deliberate hands, she tore it once, then again, until the agreement lay in pieces on the diner floor like a small white storm. Grant stared at her, stunned. Victor forgot to breathe. Maddie looked up at Caleb, and for the first time that night, a little hope returned to her face. Evelyn turned to Caleb, no longer speaking as a chief executive officer protecting a brand, but as a daughter beginning to understand the debt her father truly meant. "Mr. Rowan," she said quietly, "tomorrow there will still be a press conference. But Grant will not write the truth for you. You will." The next morning arrived with a pale gray light over Montpelier, the kind of winter light that made glass towers look colder than stone churches. Caleb had not slept. Neither had Evelyn. By 9 o'clock, the lobby of Whitaker Holdings was filled with reporters, board members, legal staff, and local officials who had come expecting a polished story about generosity, legacy, and a grateful poor man saved by a rich family's kindness. Grant Ellison stood near the stage in a navy suit, his smile repaired and ready, speaking softly to two board members as if the torn agreement in Miller's Diner had been only a temporary inconvenience. Evelyn stood beside the podium, holding the same wooden box. Caleb entered through the front doors with Maddie beside him, both wearing their best clothes, though best did not mean new. His white shirt had been ironed carefully. His dark jacket was brushed clean. Maddie wore a blue dress with a little gray sweater Nora had bought her years ago, one sleeve mended with thread that did not quite match. A few people turned to look, some with curiosity, some with pity, some with the old habit of measuring a man by what he wore before listening to what he carried. Caleb felt Maddie move closer. "Do we have to do this?" she whispered. He looked down and smiled gently. "Sometimes telling the truth is how we keep it from being sold." Evelyn heard him and closed her eyes for half a second, as if those words had reached a place no consultant ever had. Grant stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Rowan, glad you could join us. We have adjusted the statement. Very respectful. Very clean." Caleb looked at the papers in his hand. Clean is not the same as true. Grant's smile thinned. "The public does not need every detail." Evelyn turned toward the stage. "Today they do." "Hey." Hush moved through the lobby. The cameras lifted. The microphones leaned forward. Grant reached for her arm, not forcefully, but possessively, like a man trying to stop a door from opening. Evelyn pulled away. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but stripped of performance. "My father, Arthur Whitaker, left behind a private message. For 7 years, this message was kept from the people it concerned most." Grant's face changed. "Evelyn," he said under his breath. She did not stop. A screen behind her flickered to life. The room darkened slightly, and then Arthur Whitaker appeared, older, thinner, sitting in a leather chair by a window with rain tapping faintly behind him. His voice was weak, but clear. "If you are watching this, then I am gone, and my daughter has finally found the man on Route 9. Caleb's breath caught. Maddie reached for his hand. Arthur continued, "I was not stranded by accident. I had spent years building towers and forgetting people. That night, I dressed like a man with nothing because I wanted to know whether the world still saw the poor as human. Many passed me. Some mocked me. One clerk asked me to leave. Then Caleb Rowan stopped. The lobby was silent now, not professionally quiet, but morally still. Arthur looked down, gathering himself. He did not ask my name. He did not ask what I owned. He did not ask what I could return. He saw that I was cold. That was enough." Evelyn pressed a hand lightly against the wooden box. Caleb stared at the screen, remembering the motel, the coffee, Nora's tired smile. Then Arthur's voice deepened with regret. Because of him, I stopped the sale of the Laurel Street housing block. I created a fund to protect working families, single parents, and children with nowhere safe to go. But after my illness worsened, men around me buried that fund under legal language and quarterly fear. Reporters began looking at Grant. Board members shifted. Grant stood frozen, every polished inch of him suddenly visible. Arthur looked directly into the camera. Do not turn Caleb into a symbol for our brand. Let him be a witness against our pride. He saved me with a coat. I asked my company to repay him by sheltering those we forgot. The video ended. No one clapped. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed ashamed of their own blinking lights. Evelyn turned to Caleb with tears in her eyes and said, "Now I know what my father meant." Caleb looked at the crowd, then at Grant, then at the people standing beyond the glass doors outside, workers, tenants, families drawn by curiosity and cold. His voice was low, but it carried. "Then do not pay me for one night of kindness," he said. "Make sure no one in this town has to beg for warmth again." For a long moment, no one in the Whitaker Holdings lobby seemed brave enough to speak after Caleb's words settled over them. The screen behind Evelyn had gone black, but Arthur Whitaker's voice still felt present, like thunder after the storm has moved on. Reporters lowered their microphones. Board members avoided one another's eyes. Grant Ellison adjusted his tie, then realized there was nothing left to adjust that could hide what the room had heard. Evelyn turned slowly toward him. "How long did you know about the Laurel Street Fund?" Grant's mouth tightened. "This is not the proper setting for that discussion." "How long?" she asked again. The lobby held its breath. Grant glanced toward the board, searching for rescue among men and women who suddenly found the marble floor fascinating. "Your father was ill. His judgment was emotional. The fund was financially reckless." Evelyn's face went still. "It was my father's final directive. It was a sentimental liability," Grant said, and the words came out too quickly, too honestly. A murmur moved through the crowd. Outside the glass doors, families from Laurel Street stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold, bundled in work coats, school jackets, and knit hats, watching through the reflection of a world that had almost priced them out of their own lives. Caleb saw an older woman clutching a folder of rent notices. He saw a little boy with tape on one sneaker. He saw Maddie looking at them, then down at her own mended sleeve, understanding in the quiet way children do when hardship recognizes itself in another face. Evelyn stepped to the podium again. "Effective immediately, Grant. Ellison is relieved of all duties connected to the Whitaker estate, Whitaker Holdings, and every charitable trust bearing my family name." Grant stared at her. "You cannot do that here." "I just did." "Evelyn, think carefully." "I am," she said, for the first time in years. The words were not shouted, but they struck with the weight of a door closing forever. Security did not rush. No one dragged him out. That would have made the moment smaller. Instead, Grant gathered his papers with stiff hands while every camera watched the fall of a man who had mistaken control for wisdom. When he passed Caleb, he paused as if one last insult might save him. Caleb only looked at him with calm eyes. "I hope one day somebody gives you grace before you think you deserve it," he said. Grant had no answer. After he left, Evelyn looked toward the glass doors and nodded to her assistant. The doors opened. Cold air entered first, then the families, hesitant and uncertain, as if wealth had trained them to wait for permission even when justice had finally called their names. Evelyn walked down from the stage and stood beside Caleb, not above him, not in front of him, beside him. "I do not know how to fix all of this," she said quietly. "Then start by not calling people liabilities," Caleb answered. She nodded. "Tell me what to do." Caleb looked at Maddie, then at the tenants, then at the wooden box holding a code, a receipt, and the proof that kindness can outlive the night it was given. "Open the fund again," he said. "Protect Laurel Street. Repair the buildings. Keep families in their homes. And put people on the board who know what it feels like to choose between heat and groceries." Evelyn turned to the reporters. Her voice steadied, but this time it carried warmth instead of polish. "Today, Whitaker Holdings will restore and expand the housing fund my father created. It will be renamed the Arthur Caleb Community Trust, not as a reward to one man, but as a reminder of what one decent act demands from the rest of us. Caleb looked down, uncomfortable with his name in lights, but Maddie slipped her hand into his and whispered, "Mommy would like that." His eyes filled then, not from money, not from victory, but from the tender mercy of hearing Nora's goodness echoed in their daughter. Evelyn saw it, and something in her own heart softened past the armor she had worn for years. She stepped closer to Caleb and said, low enough that only he could hear, "My father sent me to pay a debt." Caleb looked through the open doors at the families beginning to cry, at reporters finally telling the right story, at Maddie smiling through tears. "No," he said gently. "He sent you to pass it on." And in the bright, cold lobby of a company built from steel, glass, and ambition, something far stronger was restored: respect. 3 months later, the first snow of December fell softly over Laurel Street, not as a warning this time, but almost like a blessing. The old brick apartments that had once been marked for sale now had new windows, repaired steps, working heat, and porch lights that glowed warm against the early dark. A small brass sign near the entrance read Arthur Caleb Community Trust, but Caleb still looked away whenever he passed it, as if his own name belonged to someone braver, someone less tired, someone who had known all along that one wet jacket could become a shelter for hundreds. He had accepted no mansion, no luxury car, no private reward. Evelyn had insisted that Maddie's school fund be protected, and Caleb, after many quiet nights at the kitchen table with Nora's old photograph beside him, had agreed. Not because he wanted wealth, but because a father's pride should never stand in the way of a child's future. He also agreed to serve on the trust board, wearing his same dark jacket to meetings where men in tailored suits now listened when he spoke. He did not speak often. That made them listen harder. On a Friday evening, Caleb stood outside the renovated Laurel Street building with Maddie beside him, watching families carry grocery bags, Christmas wreaths, and folded blankets through doors they no longer feared losing. Maddie held a drawing in both hands. It showed a man giving his coat to a stranger in the rain, and behind them, a row of houses with every window lit gold. Evelyn arrived without a driver, parking an old blue pickup she had bought at auction and asked Caleb to help her store. She stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a wool coat dusted with snow. No cameras followed her now. No lawyer spoke for her. She carried a homemade apple pie with a crooked crust and a nervous smile that made Maddie grin. "Did you bake that yourself?" Maddie asked. Evelyn looked down at the pie. "I tried." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That sounds honest." "It is edible," Evelyn said. "Mostly." Maddie laughed, and the sound moved through Caleb like light through a room he had kept closed too long. They walked together to Caleb's small house at the edge of town, the same house Victor Harlan had once tried to take. The rent had been settled, not by Evelyn buying it for him, but by the trust purchasing the property and converting it into affordable homes, with Caleb staying as caretaker by choice. He had not been rescued from work. He had been restored to purpose. On the porch, Evelyn paused beneath the yellow light. "My father sent me to pay a debt," she said softly. Caleb looked at the falling snow, then at Maddie inside the doorway, placing her drawing beside Nora's photograph. "And did you?" he asked. Evelyn's eyes filled, but this time she smiled through it. "No," she said. "I think he sent me to find out what home feels like." Caleb opened the door wider. He did not answer with a speech. He simply stepped aside and let her in. Sometimes redemption does not arrive with applause. Sometimes grace sounds like boots on a wooden porch, a child laughing in the kitchen, and a woman who once commanded towers learning how to sit at a small table without needing to own the room. Caleb Rowan never became rich in the way people measure on paper. He became something rarer. He became proof that quiet dignity can outlive humiliation, that kindness given in secret can return as justice, and that the smallest act of respect can change the future of people you may never meet. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what moment stayed with you most, and share where you are watching from so this little circle of kindness can keep growing. Thank you for watching this video until the very end.